So what if somebody messes with you? Doesn't the Bible say that you have a right to revenge? I mean, what about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? Hey, hang out with me here for just a few minutes while we talk about this topic, an eye for an eye. Welcome to Bible study number 121 on this Monday, May the 4th. This is Pastor Mark Pierce of Church Requel, and I am back downtown Mansfield again on a kind of a windy spring day. Back behind me here is the Martin Luther King Memorial, and right behind me the granite is the famous speech that Martin made to the sanitation workers of Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968, the night before King's assassination. Somehow it just seemed to be appropriate for the topic that we have today. Let's go to our Bible and turn to Matthew chapter 5, verse 38, just to get us back into the swing of where we are at in our study. Matthew 5:38 reads this way: "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Now we're just going to stop there and not go any further until tomorrow, because I think it's important that we have a pretty good understanding, first of all, of what the Old Testament taught about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We started this conversation somewhat on Saturday. We referenced the Old Testament quotations that are found in Exodus 23 to 25 and Leviticus chapter 24, Deuteronomy chapter 19 verse 21. These verses have often been quoted among the most bloodthirsty, savage, and merciless laws of the Old Testament. Actually, this is not the case. So before we can really understand what Jesus has to say about retaliation, I think it's first important that we understand what the Old Testament says and how he is responding and furthering the law, not abolishing it, remember, but fulfilling the Old Testament law. The first thing, and we talked a little bit about this on Saturday, was the idea of lex talionis. That's Latin, by the way, for law of retaliation. It's also known as the law of tit for tat, if you've ever heard that expression. In fact, it was not a savage or a bloodthirsty law. It was indeed the beginning of mercy. From the very earliest times, the concept of the vendetta and of the blood feud were very characteristic of the tribal society. If a man injured another man, then all of the members of the injured man's tribe could take vengeance upon all of the members of the tribe of the man who had committed the crime in the first place. This law of lex talionis, or tit for tat, actually deliberately limits the punishment to no more than the equivalent of the injury. This is seen in this historical light if you understand how a blood feud can happen, how it's possible for people to end up going to war, as, by the way, often was the case, especially during medieval times, just over a personal offense. Well, then you could understand what the importance of this would be and how merciful this limitation would be of no more punishment than what was actually committed in the crime. Secondly, we find not only the principle of lex talionis, but we also see that throughout the Old Testament teachings, there never was given the right to an individual to extract vengeance against someone else. This is always put in the light of how a judge or how a law court should lay down punishment and penalty. Indeed, we see that this is the case when we read Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 18, which reads this way: that the judges shall inquire diligently and look into things. All right, so it was always the responsibility of the judge and society, never the right of an individual for a personal vendetta. Always a guide for a judge. And then thirdly, if we take a look at history, we find that after the very earliest tribal societies, this law of lex talionis in almost any even semi-civilized society ever was actually carried out literally in terms of an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. In fact, the Jewish jurist often argued that to carry this law out literally might actually end up providing for injustice, because it would be possible, for example, to maybe sacrifice a bad eye when the crime was to take out someone's good eye, or someone's bad tooth for a good tooth. You see, from the very earliest time periods that we have records of, the injury was almost always assessed in terms of a monetary value. For example, if we take a look at the Jewish law, what's known as the Mishnah, that was provided in Babylonian times, we find something very similar to our own law, that there was a liability for an injury, 5 principles: a liability for an injury. For example, if it was an injury to a slave, then what was the value of the slave after the injury, and a compensation will be given for the difference. A compensation would be given for pain. What's the amount of money that someone would undergo to go through that pain? What would you have to pay someone to undergo a pain like that? Or thirdly, compensation for healing costs, what it would cost to heal somebody back. Fourthly, they would be paid for their loss of time. They'd be compensated for wages lost. And fifthly, they'd be compensated for any indignity that was suffered, some type of a compensation for the humility that was suffered. Now, that's very similar to the pattern of law that we find today in a personal injury case. Fourthly and lastly, we see that this principle of lex talionis was by no means the entirety of the Old Testament ethics. There certainly are many other glimpses of mercy that we see in the Old Testament. For example, in Leviticus 19:18, we read this: "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the..." Well, this is what happens when you're downtown Mansfield. Get a little bit of a siren activity. Leviticus 19:18. "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." We also read from Proverbs chapter 25, verse 21. "If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink." Also from Proverbs chapter 24, verse 29. "Do not say, I will do to him as he has done to me." Yeah, these are not New Testament verses. These are not teachings of Jesus. This is Old Testament law. And then finally this, from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 30. "Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes, and let him be filled with insults." Well, that's a good transition for us to tomorrow. We're going to wrap it up today. Tomorrow we do teach what Jesus taught about retaliation, and that is turning the other cheek.